Across the galaxy humans were spoken about like ghosts, like shadows from an old nightmare, a name that made soldiers shake and empires whisper, because long ago, before anyone living was born, there had been a great war, a war so violent that entire worlds burned in the sky and the species called human vanished without a trace, no bodies, no graves, no signals, nothing, only rumors and fear and stories told in dark rooms that a single human could fight armies, that humans never surrendered, that humans could think faster, move faster, adapt faster, and win even when they were broken and bleeding. And because no one had seen a human in 300 years, every alien believed they were extinct, but still terrified of the idea that one might return. And across this fearful galaxy, one hunter stood above all others, a cold, silent warrior named Commander Vexor from the Predator race known as the Zirin. She had hunted beasts that crushed tanks, she had survived storms that melted metal, she had never failed a mission, and she believed there was nothing left in the universe that could scare her until the Council summoned her in secret and gave her one simple message: a living human had been detected on a forbidden jungle planet, far from all maps, far from all trade routes, and no one knew how he got there, no one knew why he was alive, and no one knew what he wanted. They only knew the signal was real and her mission was clear: capture him alive, do not kill him, do not harm him, bring him back. Vexor did not show fear. She nodded and accepted the mission, but deep inside a small cold feeling twisted in her chest, because she knew the history. She knew that even the strongest armies once begged for mercy from humans. She knew that entire fleets vanished when humans decided to fight. She knew that even her own ancestors refused to speak about the last battle, and as she walked to her ship she felt something she had never felt before, a question: is this real? Could a human truly still exist? She launched into the void, stars sliding past like silver dust, her ship silent, her mind focused, but every time she closed her eyes she saw images she had studied, old recordings, blurry, broken, showing humans with sharp eyes and calm faces walking through explosions like they were nothing, and she wondered what kind of creature could be so calm in destruction. She reached the forbidden planet after days of travel, its surface covered in endless thick jungle, black clouds twisting above it like warning signs, and when she approached orbit her scanners flickered. For the first time in her career the machine failed, no data, no readings, only silence. The planet felt wrong, like something was hiding under its skin, and she landed slowly, her ship touching the ground with a hiss. When the doors opened she expected noise, insects, storms, wind, but instead she heard nothing, absolute silence, a silence so heavy it felt alive. The jungle stood still, no animals, no movement, only towering trees covered in moss and shadows. Vexor stepped out, her armor shining, her weapon ready, her visor scanning the area, but the scanner stayed blank, as if the entire world refused to be measured. She took a slow breath and began walking, her boots sinking into soft earth, each step echoing louder than it should, because there was no other sound. The deeper she went the stranger it became, no birds, no creatures, no tracks, only stillness. She felt watched not by one thing but by the entire forest, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. As if the planet knew her mission and did not approve, she activated a drone, small, fast, silent. It rose into the air to scout ahead, but after 3 seconds the signal cut off and it vanished from her screen. No explosion, no impact, just gone. She whispered to herself, impossible, and for the first time she felt her pulse quicken. She walked further, her visor caught something on the ground, footprints, large human-shaped footprints. She froze, staring at them. The shape was perfect. 5 toes, heel strong stride, but even more frightening was the depth. The footprints sank deep into the soil, meaning the owner had weight, strength, power. She knelt to study them, but before she could take a sample the wind moved, or she thought it did, and when she looked back the footprints were gone, erased, no trace, like they had never existed. Vexor stood slowly, her hand tightening on her weapon. She was not alone, something was here, something intelligent, something waiting. She heard a faint crack behind her. She spun around. Weapon raised, nothing, only vines and trees, but she felt it, eyes watching her, studying her, measuring her. She spoke aloud even though she knew nothing would answer. I am Commander Vexor of the Zirin. I am here under council order. Identify yourself. Silence, heavy, patient. She took another step. Suddenly branches shifted high above, not like random wind, but like someone moving through the canopy with skill. No sound, no stumble, smooth, controlled movement. Something was following her from above. She aimed up, but saw only leaves. She moved faster, her instincts waking up, her hunter side sharpened. She was being tracked. She felt the presence closing behind her, then pulling away like it was hurting her, guiding her deeper into the jungle. She stopped, forcing her breath steady. Who hunts the hunter? She whispered, another sound, quick, soft, behind her. She turned again, nothing, but this time on the ground where she had stood moments ago. New footprints appeared, human footprints, as if someone had stood right behind her and walked away while she wasn't looking. Her skin crawled. She scanned again, nothing, the scanner still dead. She felt fear, real fear, not from danger but from the unknown. Her training told her to retreat, call for backup, assess the threat, but her mission said capture alive, and her pride refused to back away, so she continued moving deeper into the jungle. Trees grew taller, darker, the air thicker, her heart beat louder, each step like a countdown. She noticed something else. The path she followed was Two clean, two perfect vines, cut away branches cleared. Someone had prepared this route for her, not to escape, but to invite her in. She realized with a shock the human was not running. The human wanted her to come to him. The human was leading her. She stopped, her breath sharp. Why would a human wait? Why would he reveal his presence unless he was confident, unless he was stronger than her, unless he was sure she could not hurt him? She thought about the old war videos. Humans walking calmly through fire. Humans fighting with bare hands against armored beasts, humans smiling while entire fleets burned, and she felt a cold truth. Maybe humans were not monsters because they were wild, maybe they were monsters because they were calm. She moved again, slower, alert, her senses stretched thin, every rustle, every shadow making her fingers twitch at her trigger. Her visor flickered for a moment, and she saw a shape, tall, broad-shouldered, standing far away between trees, unmoving like a statue. She raised her weapon. "Halt!" she shouted, but the figure did not move, did not run, did not even flinch. Then her visor blinked again, and the figure was gone like smoke. Vexa felt her breath shake. She had hunted thousands of targets, but none had ever behaved like this. They ran, they panicked, they fought, but this human watched, waited, calculated. She began to understand the rumors. A single human can destroy armies, maybe not by rage, but by patience, by intelligence, by control. The jungle grew darker, lightning flickered above, thunder rolled, yet no rain fell, only tension. The ground trembled slightly, as if something massive moved deep underground, and she wondered, did this planet belong to him? Did he choose this place because it matched him? Silent, dangerous, unknown. She reached a clearing, small, circular, surrounded by trees, twisted like claws. And in the center she saw something impossible, a single message carved into a flat stone in an ancient language she had seen only once in forbidden archives. It read one word: human. Her chest tightened. This was no accident, no random encounter. This was a meeting arranged by him. He wanted her here, he wanted to be found. But why her? Why now? She whispered into the stillness, "Show yourself." The wind blew softly, then stopped completely. The world froze, and somewhere far ahead she heard it, a faint, slow, quiet sound, not footsteps, not breath, but something calm, deliberate, like someone cooking, chopping wood, or preparing something ordinary, human-like. She felt a strange chill, not from danger, but from confusion. Everything she knew said humans were chaos, were destruction, were wrath, but the presence she felt was calm, controlled, like a mind sharper than knives. She realized a terrifying thought: maybe humans did not disappear because they were defeated, maybe they left because they were done with war, maybe they became something more, something refined, something that did not need noise or rage to be powerful. She took another step deeper into the unknown, and the jungle seemed to close behind her like a door, sealing her fate. She understood one thing clearly: the hunt had begun, but she was not the hunter anymore. She was the one being led, observed, tested by something far smarter than her. She breathed slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "This is no mission, this is a trap." But she kept walking, because she knew there was no turning back, because the galaxy's greatest fear might be waiting ahead, a live, real human. And as the shadows shifted and the silence grew heavier, she understood why the records called them vanished monsters, not because they were beasts, but because they were calm, silent, unstoppable. And now, after 300 years, she was the first to walk into their world alone. The jungle whispered its word again in her mind: human, and the fear wrapped around her like cold air as she stepped forward into the darkness, knowing she was about to face the truth of a legend that should have stayed dead, knowing that whatever watched her was powerful enough to erase her existence in a heartbeat, yet waited patiently, as if curious, as if studying her. And as she walked deeper, the heavy silence felt like breathing, like the planet itself was alive, and she could not shake the feeling that the human already knew everything about her: her name, her mission, her thoughts, her fear. The footprints, the traps, the silent drone, all pointed to one terrifying reality: he was in control, and she was already inside his territory, inside his plan. And in that chilling moment she understood the greatest horror was not that a human existed, but that he wanted her to find him and was ready for her long before she arrived. And as the path narrowed and shadows swallowed her, she felt only one thing: the true hunt was just beginning, and she was no longer sure who would survive. Began with Commander Vexa moving deeper into the jungle, but this time her steps were slower, heavier, almost uncertain. Like each step carried a weight she had never known before, and inside her chest something tight pulled at her breath, because she finally understood she was no longer chasing a target, she was walking towards something that already knew her better than she knew herself. And that thought felt like ice in her veins. She tried to remind herself she was the strongest hunter in her empire, the undefeated warrior who never cried, never hesitated, never feared. But now her hands felt slightly unsteady, and she hated that she noticed it. She hated that she cared. Because fear was weakness and weakness was death. Yet no matter how strong she tried to stand, the truth pressed into her heart that she was being hunted not by claws or storms or machines, but by a mind sharper than all of them. A mind that had stayed silent for 300 years, only to rise now, waiting for her. She swallowed slowly and kept walking, and the jungle around her seemed to follow her breath like it was alive. The air thickening and tightening until every sound felt too loud. Even her heartbeat felt like thunder in her ears. And for the first time in her life she wished she wasn't alone. Wished someone else was there to take some of the weight. But she pushed that feeling away because she had never needed anyone. She was trained to stand alone, survive alone, win alone. But in her heart she felt a strange ache she didn't understand, something like loneliness mixed with fear, something she had never allowed herself to feel before, and she wondered why this mission was hurting her in ways she couldn't name. As she walked she noticed the forest floor changing, the roots smoother, the leaves arranged like footsteps had passed again and again, and suddenly she realized this wasn't wild land, this was a path someone had walked for years, maybe decades, maybe centuries, and that someone was him, the human, the one she was supposed to capture like prey. But now she felt small, like a child stepping into a world far older and wiser than her, and that shame burned in her chest because she had always been proud, always confident, always fearless. Yet here she felt like a beginner and it broke something inside her. She whispered to herself, barely moving her lips, "Why am I shaking?" And the answer hurt because she knew deep inside it wasn't the weapons or strength of the human that terrified her. It was his calmness, his silence, the way he didn't run, didn't hide, didn't attack. He simply waited, like he already understood everything and had nothing to prove, and that calm was more frightening than any monster roaring in her face. She remembered old recordings of humans smiling in battles, smiling in chaos, smiling in fire, and she wondered how a species could be so calm in danger, how they could feel peace where others felt terror, and she felt something crack inside her chest, a strange mix of fear and respect, like she was walking toward a legend, not an enemy. Suddenly a soft sound echoed above her, like a breath carried by wind, gentle but close, and she spun quickly, aiming her weapon, but saw nothing, only her own reflection in her visor, eyes wide and scared, and seeing her own fear hit her harder than anything else because she had never seen herself like this before, never seen her eyes like a child's eyes trembling at shadows. And she felt humiliation burn her throat. She should not be afraid, she should be angry, she should be strong, but all she could feel was this crushing emotion, like she was losing control of her own heart. She wanted to call her ship for extraction, she wanted to run, but her pride wouldn't let her, and something deeper than pride held her feet in place, something she couldn't explain, something emotional like curiosity mixed with destiny. Like she was meant to be here, drawn to this human not just by orders but by something she had never experienced before, something that whispered inside her chest, "Don't turn back." She forced her legs to keep moving even though they felt heavier with every step, and tears stung in her eyes though she refused to let them fall. She blinked hard, swallowing her pain because she couldn't accept the idea that she, the strongest warrior of her people, was breaking from nothing but silence and shadow. Yet deep down she knew it wasn't nothing, it was him, the human, the presence that followed her like a heartbeat behind her shoulder, close but never seen, gentle but terrifying. She found herself whispering in a voice she barely recognized, "Please stop watching me," and the moment she said it her chest twisted with shame because she sounded scared, she sounded weak, she sounded like she needed mercy, and she hated herself for it. But at the same time she felt something softer, something painful but strange, like she wanted to be seen not as a hunter but as a person. Like she wanted someone to understand her fear instead of mock it, and that confused her more than anything else. Because she had never cared what anyone thought before, never wanted connection, never wanted comfort. But now in this silent world she wanted someone to speak, someone to break the crushing quiet, someone to say she wasn't alone. She took another step and her foot slipped slightly and she gasped, catching herself, breathing fast, chest trembling, and in that moment she realized how fragile she truly was, not her body but her heart, her emotions, the parts she always buried deep under armor and orders, and she wondered if the human knew that about her, if he could see through her armor like glass, if he understood her pain before she did. She stopped suddenly because on a tree ahead she saw something simple but terrifying, a single handprint pressed into the bark, a human handprint, large, strong fingers spread like someone had touched the tree only moments ago, and her throat tightened because the handprint was fresh, wet with sap, still dripping, like he had been standing right there watching her. Maybe close enough to reach out and touch her shoulder. And the thought sent a shock through her entire body because she realized she would not have known, she wouldn't have heard, she wouldn't have felt him. He could have ended her without a sound. But he didn't. He left the handprint instead like a message, "I am here, don't be afraid," or maybe be afraid. She didn't know, and that uncertainty broke something inside her because she didn't know whether he was enemy or something else, something deeper. Her vision blurred for a moment and she wiped her eyes, angrily refusing to cry. But the truth was too heavy. She wasn't just scared, she was overwhelmed by the silence, by the mystery, by the feeling that she was walking into the hands of someone who could destroy her easily but chose not to, and that strange mercy felt more frightening than death. She whispered again, barely audible, "Why me?" and the pain in her voice surprised her because she wasn't asking as a soldier but as a living being, tired, lonely, afraid, and in that moment she felt like her entire life of pride and strength was peeling away, leaving her raw, exposed, vulnerable. She stepped forward again because she had no choice and because something in her heart pulled her forward like invisible hands guiding her, and she felt an emotion she never expected: trust. Small, fragile but real. Like a tiny spark inside her chest telling her the human didn't want to hurt her. Telling her he was waiting not to kill but to meet. And that fragile hope made her chest ache because she didn't know why she felt it, but she did, and it was real. She breathed shakily and continued walking deeper into his world, deeper into his silence, deeper into her own breaking emotions, and as the forest closed around her she realized the most terrifying thing wasn't that she might die, it was that she might feel something for the human she hadn't even seen fully yet, something emotional, something powerful, something that could change her forever, and that realization shook her more than any monster ever had, because for the first time in her life she wasn't afraid of death, she was afraid of what this human might mean to her and how he might change everything she thought she knew about herself. And as she walked forward, heart trembling, eyes burning, breath unsteady, she understood the predator was gone. She was no longer the hunter, she was a soul standing on the edge of something unknown, something emotional, something dangerous, and she could not turn back even if she wanted to, because the human was waiting, and her heart, whether she liked it or not, was already walking toward him. Began like a silent breath inside Commander Vex's chest. Her body moving forward even though her mind screamed for answers, every step sinking into the soft ground as the jungle thickened around her like walls closing in. And she felt something deep and raw twisting inside her. Not just fear now, but a strange emotional weight. Like the closer she got to the human, the more her heart felt exposed. Like he was peeling away every layer she had spent a lifetime building, every shield, every wall, every cold piece of armor she wore inside herself. And she hated how helpless that made her feel, because she had always believed she was unbreakable. A weapon with no weakness. Yet now she felt like a thin thread ready to snap, her breath unsteady, her throat tight. And she couldn't understand why this unseen man could shake her soul more than any beast or battlefield ever had. She kept walking because something inside her refused to stop, something deeper than orders, deeper than pride, almost like a connection she didn't choose but couldn't escape. And as she walked she noticed the jungle changing again. The darkness fading into softer light, the air warmer, calmer, and she felt her heartbeat slowing just a little, like the forest itself was soothing her, guiding her gently forward. And that terrified her more than the silence, because she felt cared for, protected. As if someone was making sure she wouldn't stumble or fall. Someone she had never met yet, someone who watched her with quiet attention. And that thought struck her heart hard because it felt intimate, personal, almost tender, and she didn't know how to breathe through that feeling. She reached a narrow stream, clear and glowing under faint sunlight, and as she knelt beside it to steady herself she saw her reflection in the water, eyes tired, shoulders tense, her face no longer the face of a fierce hunter but of someone hurting, someone lost, someone who didn't know what she was walking toward, and the sight shook her, a sting rising behind her eyes as emotion flooded her chest, and she whispered shakily, "What is happening to me?" like she wasn't talking to herself but to someone else. Someone she knew was listening somewhere in the trees. She dipped her hand into the water to cool her shaking fingers, and when she pulled it out she froze because something small and delicate rested on her palm. A folded leaf tied gently with a thin vine like a tiny package, and her breath caught because she hadn't seen it fall, she hadn't seen anyone approach. It was just suddenly there, as if placed softly into her hand by invisible fingers, and when she slowly unfolded it she found dried fruit inside, clean cut and wrapped with care, not a threat, not poison. But food, simple, humble, thoughtful, and the gesture broke something open inside her chest because it meant he wasn't trying to kill her. He was trying to help her, trying to take care of her hunger, her strength, her exhaustion, and the kindness hit her harder than fear ever could. She stared at the fruit trembling because she didn't know how to handle kindness. She had spent her life in war, in survival, in cold missions where no one cared if she lived or died, no one offered comfort, no one offered warmth. And now here in a silent jungle, the most feared species in history, a human, was feeding her like she mattered, like her life was worth something, and that simple act ripped open memories she never spoke about, the years of training, the loneliness of being the strongest, the emptiness of victory, the silence of having no one to come home to, and her throat tightened painfully because she realized she had never once been given something out of kindness. She held the fruit close to her chest, not eating it yet, just feeling its weight, feeling the message inside it, and whispered in a trembling voice, "Why are you helping me?" And the question wasn't about survival anymore. It was about her heart, her identity, her worth, because she couldn't understand why someone who could end her with a breath would instead choose to show care, and that care made her feel seen for the first time in her life. She stood slowly and continued walking, clutching the little leaf bundle, her emotions raw and exposed, and soon she noticed the trees parting gently as if clearing a path for her, and her heartbeat quickened again because she knew she was getting closer. She could feel him like warmth in the air, a presence steady, calm, patient, and the closer she got the stronger the emotion inside her grew, a mix of fear and longing she couldn't name, like her soul was reaching before her body could. Then she saw it, another footprint, clear and fresh, larger than before, as if he had just stepped there moments ago, and beside it was something even more shocking. A single line drawn into the soil with a fingertip. A message not in words but in meaning. A gentle curve pointing forward, like an invitation, like a promise, like a voice saying keep going, I'm here. And her chest tightened so hard she had to press her palm against it because she had never been invited anywhere in her life. She had always been ordered, commanded, forced. But this felt like someone was waiting for her, specifically her. And she felt tears burn her eyes again, not from fear but from a deep aching emotion she didn't know how to carry. She stepped past the footprint and the air shifted, warmer, softer, almost like breath against her skin. And for the first time she felt something she never expected. Safety. Not complete, not absolute, but real enough to make her shoulders drop slightly, real enough to make her eyes close as she inhaled slowly, real enough to whisper in her heart that maybe she wasn't walking to her death. Maybe she was walking towards something she needed without knowing it. Suddenly a soft rustle sounded behind her and she spun again, weapon raised, but this time instead of panic she felt a strange calm wash over her. Like she knew he was close but she wasn't going to be harmed. And in that moment she understood the most emotional truth of all. She wasn't afraid of the human anymore, she was afraid of how much she wanted to see him, hear him, understand him. And that want scared her more deeply than death ever had because it made her feel alive in a way she didn't recognize. Like her heart had been numb for years and was only now waking up. She took one final step into a clearing she hadn't seen before and her breath caught painfully because the space felt different, brighter, warmer, like someone had shaped it like home, and she knew without seeing him that the human was close, so close she could feel his presence like steady warmth on her skin, and her heart pounded with a mix of terror and anticipation and aching emotion, and she whispered in a breaking voice, I'm here not as a soldier, not as a hunter, but as a soul standing on the edge of something she could not turn away from. And in that fragile, trembling moment she realized she was no longer searching for a target, she was searching for him. Began the moment Commander Vexa stepped into the clearing, her breath catching in her throat like her lungs forgot how to work, because everything in front of her felt unreal, gentle, and terrifying all at once. The ground smoothed like someone had cleared it with care. The trees curved around the space almost protectively, sunlight slipping through the leaves in warm golden beams that touched the earth like soft hands. And for the first time since she landed on this haunted, silent planet, she didn't feel threatened, she felt welcomed. And that single feeling made her knees weaken because she didn't know how to handle warmth. She didn't know how to carry peace. She only knew how to survive pain, darkness, and war. Her eyes moved slowly across the clearing and then she saw it. A small wooden shelter, simple, humble, built with bare hands, its walls carved with quiet patience, its roof covered in leaves woven carefully to keep out rain, and smoke rose gently from a small fire beside it. Not wild and chaotic but steady and calm, like someone who understood the rhythm of nature. And that calmness hit her harder than any weapon ever could because it meant he wasn't hiding in fear. He wasn't running from her. He was living, existing, breathing, waiting. Her heartbeat pounded so hard it hurt, her hands shaking as she tried to lift her weapon, but her fingers wouldn't obey because some deep part of her understood this moment wasn't about violence. It wasn't about capturing a target. It was about facing something that would change her forever. Something she wasn't trained for. Softness, humanity, vulnerability. Her eyes drifted to the fire, and that's when she saw him. The human. Sitting calmly beside the flames, legs folded, posture relaxed. His hands moving slowly as he stirred something in a small metal pan over the fire. His head slightly tilted like he was listening to the crackling wood or the wind. Completely unafraid, completely exposed, completely at peace. And Vexa felt her entire world tilt, her chest tightening with a painful rush of emotion she couldn't name. She had imagined a monster, a warrior, a raging beast, some towering legend dripping with power and violence. But instead she found a man cooking dinner like it was the most ordinary moment in the universe. And that contrast shattered her expectations so deeply she felt tears prick her eyes. He didn't look up right away, as if he already knew she was there and didn't need to check. That confidence so gentle yet so powerful that it made her legs tremble. and when he finally lifted his head and turned toward her, she froze. His eyes. Calm. Deep. Steady. Not cold, not angry, not cruel, just understanding, like he could see straight into her soul without effort. Like he already knew every fear, every regret, every wound she carried, and instead of judging her, he simply accepted it. Accepted her. And that acceptance broke something inside her armor that she didn't even know was there. His voice came next, soft and warm. No threat, no command, just simple human kindness as he said, "You must be hungry." Those 4 words hit her harder than any blast, because no one had ever spoken to her like that. Not with care, not with concern, not with warmth. She had always been a soldier, a weapon, an asset, never a person, never someone worth comforting, and suddenly her throat burned, her vision blurred, her chest shook because she didn't know how to stand under the weight of kindness. She tried to speak but her voice cracked, her lips trembling, and all she managed was a shaky breath that sounded like a sob she refused to let escape. He didn't move toward her, didn't threaten, didn't rush. He simply turned back to the fire and stirred the pan gently, giving her space like he understood she was breaking inside, like he knew she needed time to breathe. That small gesture felt like a hand on her heart, steadying her without touching her, and she hated how much she needed it, hated how much she wanted to sit beside that fire and let the warmth melt the fear she had carried her entire life. She took one step forward and her knees nearly buckled, her weapon lowering without her noticing, her fingers loosening as if her body finally surrendered to the truth that this wasn't a battlefield. This wasn't a hunt. This was something far more human, something emotional, something she had never been allowed to feel, gentleness. A soft breeze brushed past her, carrying the quiet scent of cooked food, warm and comforting, and she felt a lump rise in her throat because she couldn't remember the last time she had eaten without rushing, without fear, without battle, without loneliness. The human looked back again, his expression calm, eyes soft, and he nodded slightly toward the fire, not commanding her, not ordering her, just inviting her, and that simple invitation felt like a doorway to a world she never believed existed. Her voice finally escaped in a fragile whisper. Why aren't you afraid of me?" Her words shook with pain she had hidden for years, and he didn't laugh, didn't mock her, didn't show arrogance. He simply answered with quiet honesty, "Because I've been waiting for you." The words hit her like lightning, her heart collapsing inward, her breath shattering, because for her entire life she believed she was alone, unwanted, untethered. But this human spoke like she mattered, like she belonged here, like she wasn't a hunter or a weapon but someone worth waiting for. Emotions surged through her like a tidal wave. Fear, confusion, longing, hope, and she couldn't stop the tears that finally spilled down her cheeks, silent and slow, tracing the face of a warrior who had never been allowed to cry. And as she stood there trembling, staring at the quiet man cooking dinner for her, she understood the most terrifying truth of all. The galaxy lied. Humans weren't monsters because they were violent. They were monsters because they were calm, because they cared, because they felt, because they could break a soul with kindness instead of claws. And in that single moment, with her heart cracking open in a way she couldn't control, Commander Vexa realized she wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of how deeply he could change her. And she knew, without turning back, that her life would never be the same. Began with Commander Vexa standing frozen at the edge of the clearing, her weapon limp in her hand, her heart pounding like it was trying to break free from her chest, because the human's words kept echoing in her mind, "I've been waiting for you." And she didn't know how to breathe through the weight of that sentence, didn't know how to understand it, didn't know why it hurt and comforted her at the same time. And for a long moment she just stared at him, this calm, mysterious man who should have been a threat, a legend, a monster. Yet here he was gently cooking dinner like he was welcoming an old friend home. Her legs finally moved, slow and shaky, carrying her closer to the fire until she could feel its warmth brushing her skin. And that warmth hit her harder than any explosion because it wasn't just heat. It felt like safety, like tenderness, like a feeling she had never been allowed to experience. And that realization made her eyes sting again with tears she couldn't stop. The human, Elias, she would soon learn, lifted the pan and poured the food onto 2 simple wooden plates, movements steady and graceful, like someone who understood patience, like someone who didn't rush because he wasn't afraid. And Vexa couldn't help staring at his hands, strong but gentle, Hands that could probably tear through armor yet chose to cook, to care, to offer nourishment instead of violence. And that choice made her chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. He handed her a plate, not stepping close enough to overwhelm her, just close enough that she could reach out if she wanted to. And she hesitated because no one had ever offered her anything that wasn't a command or a weapon, and her fingers trembled as she took it, the warmth of the food seeping into her palms like a quiet promise that she wasn't in danger. She sat slowly near the fire, legs folding beneath her armor cold against the soft earth, and she felt strangely small, strangely fragile, like a child sitting beside something she didn't understand, and Elias sat a short distance across from her, leaving space but still close enough that she could feel his presence like a steady heartbeat in the air. For a long moment neither spoke, and the silence wasn't heavy or frightening this time. It was gentle. Peaceful, like the world was finally allowed to breathe, and Vexa didn't know what to do with this kind of silence, didn't know how to exist without fear, and her throat tightened painfully because she realized she didn't remember the last time she sat without armor around her heart. When she finally took a bite of the food, the taste hit her like a wave, simple, warm, comforting, and her eyes widened because she had expected bitterness or strangeness or anything unfamiliar, but instead it tasted like home. A home she had never had, and that thought sent tears spilling down her cheeks again before she could stop them. She covered her mouth, embarrassed, ashamed, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I don't know why I'm crying." And Elias looked at her with soft, steady eyes. No judgment, no confusion, just understanding, and he said quietly, "Because for the first time, you're not fighting." His words shattered her. She had spent her entire life fighting, against enemies, against expectations, against loneliness, against her own emotions. And suddenly she felt the weight of all those years crashing onto her shoulders, breaking her armor from the inside, and a soft sob escaped her, fragile and raw, and she hated how weak she sounded but she couldn't hold it in anymore. She bowed her head, shoulders shaking, and whispered, "No one has ever cared if I was tired." Elias didn't gasp or react with shock. He just nodded gently, as if he had known all along, as if he understood the wounds she never spoke about, and he replied, "You've carried too much alone." Those words were a blade made of kindness, slicing through every wall she had built, and she pressed a trembling hand to her chest because the pain was too much. Pain from years of silence, from nights spent alone, from battles she fought without anyone waiting for her, and she whispered brokenly, "Why are you being kind to me?" Elias looked at the fire for a moment, flames reflecting in his calm eyes, and his voice came soft, steady, almost soothing, because strength doesn't mean being alone. Vexa's breath trembled, her mind spinning, because no one had ever taught her that. No one had ever said she didn't have to carry everything by herself, and she felt something inside her begin to melt. Fear turning into vulnerability, vulnerability turning into longing, a longing so deep and silent that it terrified her more than death. Elias finally said his name, "I'm Elias," and hearing it was like hearing a heartbeat, real and human and alive, and she whispered her name back, "Vexa," her voice soft, almost tender, and it felt like she was saying her own name for the first time as a person, not a weapon. Elias smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just a small gentle curve of his lips, and that tiny smile felt like sunlight breaking through years of darkness, warming a part of her soul she thought was dead, and she had to look away because the emotion in her chest was overwhelming, so strong she couldn't breathe. She asked in a trembling voice, "How did you know I was coming?" Elias didn't hesitate, didn't hide, he simply answered, "I've watched this world for a long time. And I knew someday someone would come looking, not for a monster, but for the truth." Vexa felt her heart twist because he spoke like he wasn't angry about being hunted, like he understood why she came, like he forgave her before she even asked for forgiveness, and that level of empathy terrified her, because compassion was something she had never been given, never been taught, and she didn't know how to receive it. She stared at him, voice quivering as she whispered, "What truth?" Elias turned his eyes to her, calm and deep, and said softly, "That humans didn't disappear because we were broken. We disappeared because we were tired." The words sank into her like heavy stones, shifting everything she believed, everything the galaxy had told her, everything she had been trained to fear, and suddenly she wasn't looking at a legend or a threat. She was looking at someone who had lived through pain she couldn't imagine, someone who chose peace over destruction, someone who chose to cook dinner instead of wield war. And that realization hit her so hard she had to press her palm against the ground to steady herself. The fire crackled softly, the sky dimmed into twilight, and in that quiet moment Vexa understood something terrifying and emotional. She didn't want this moment to end. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to go back to a world where she was alone. And the thought that scared her the most wasn't that Elias was dangerous. It was that he was gentle. Because gentleness could change her. Gentleness could heal her. Gentleness could break her open in ways she wasn't ready for. And as her tears dried slowly on her cheeks, she realized with a trembling heart that she wasn't just sitting with a human. She was sitting with the first person who had ever treated her like she mattered. And that was the most dangerous thing of all that began in the quiet glow of the dying fire. The sky above turning deep violet as night settled over the jungle, and Commander Vexa sat there with her plate in her hands, not eating any more, just staring into the flames as her heart twisted with emotions she didn't know how to hold, because everything Elias said kept echoing inside her like a soft thunder. Humans disappeared because they were tired, and the idea shattered her understanding of history, of war, of power, of strength, because she had always been taught humans vanished in rage, in violence, in blood. But now she was facing a truth that felt so gentle it hurt more than any battle. A truth that humans chose silence, chose peace, chose to walk away not because they were weak but because they were exhausted from carrying the weight of a galaxy that feared them instead of understanding them. She looked at Elias, his calm profile lit by the fire, his eyes steady and thoughtful, and for the first time she saw something she hadn't noticed before. Sadness, deep and ancient, like he carried centuries of memories behind those quiet eyes. Memories of war, loss, loneliness, and the realization made her chest ache in a way she couldn't breathe through, because she had thought she was alone in her pain, alone in her emptiness, alone in her endless fight. But now she was sitting across from someone who had walked through a darkness far greater than hers, and instead of breaking, he chose kindness. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You were tired of war." Elias didn't look away from the fire. He just nodded slowly and said in a voice so soft it felt like a wound opening, "Humans fought until there was nothing left inside us. We won battles, but we lost ourselves." His words wrapped around her heart like cold air and heat at the same time. And she felt tears rise again because she understood that sentence more deeply than she wanted to admit. She understood what it meant to win on the outside but lose something inside. She understood what it meant to be praised for strength while carrying invisible scars no one cared about. And she whispered almost to herself, "I know that feeling." Elias finally turned his eyes toward her, and in that single moment she felt seen in a way she had never been seen before, like he wasn't looking at her armor or her rank or her reputation, but at her soul, the raw trembling part she had always hidden, and he said gently, "You've been alone a long time." The words hit her harder than any weapon because they were true, painfully true, and she pressed her hand against her chest as if she could hold her heart together before it fell apart, whispering shakily, "No one ever cared if I was breaking, they only cared if I kept fighting." Elias's expression softened even more, something warm and sorrowful in his gaze, and he answered quietly, "That's not strength. That's survival." Vexa shuddered, her breath catching, because she had lived her entire life believing survival was strength, believing shutting down her emotions made her powerful, believing loneliness was the price of being the best. But now that belief was crumbling like ash inside her and she didn't know who she was without it, didn't know what was left of her if she wasn't the unbreakable hunter, and the fear of that emptiness made her voice crack as she whispered, "Then what is strength?" Elias looked at her with a calm so deep it felt ancient and answered, "Strength is knowing pain, and choosing not to become it." The words struck her like lightning inside her chest, her breath shaking out of her lungs because she had spent years becoming her pain, becoming her anger, becoming her wounds, using them like armor, like weapons, like fuel, and now she didn't know how to stop, didn't know how to live without the hard shell she had built around her heart, and the truth terrified her. She turned her face away, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, and whispered, "I don't know how to be anything else." Elias didn't move closer, didn't try to touch her, didn't invade her space, but his voice came steady and warm. "You don't have to know right now. You just have to stop running from yourself." She let out a broken breath because she realized she hadn't been chasing the human. She had been running from her own emptiness, from her own loneliness, from the truth that she was tired too, just like them, Tired of war, tired of silence, tired of pretending she didn't feel anything, and her voice trembled as she whispered, "I am so tired." Elias closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them she saw something haunting in his gaze, something that looked like he carried the exhaustion of an entire species, and he said softly, "Humans walked away because we couldn't carry the galaxy's fear anymore. We chose silence so we wouldn't become the monsters they believed we were." Vexa felt that sentence like a blade of sorrow slicing through her chest, and she imagined millions of humans leaving everything behind, not in anger but in grief, in heartbreak, in exhaustion. And the thought made her tears fall harder, her shoulders trembling as she whispered, "You didn't disappear, you sacrificed yourselves." Elias didn't answer with pride or arrogance. He just nodded with a quiet pain that made her heart twist, and she realized humans weren't legends because they destroyed. They were legends because they endured, because they cared too deeply, because they loved too fiercely, because their hearts broke and they still chose peace. She wiped her tears with a shaking hand, but they kept falling, and she whispered through the ache, "Why are you alone here? Where are the others?" Elias looked up at the stars barely visible through the trees, his voice low and filled with a sorrow so heavy it felt ancient. "I stayed behind when the rest left. Someone had to watch. Someone had to wait." Vexa's breath caught because suddenly she understood the most heartbreaking truth. Elias wasn't waiting for her specifically, he was waiting for anyone who would come not with weapons, but with a heart willing to listen, willing to see, willing to understand. He had waited 300 years in silence, in loneliness, in patience, just for the chance to show the truth. That kind of devotion, that kind of faith, that kind of emotional endurance was more powerful than any force she had ever witnessed, and her chest ached so painfully she pressed her palm harder against it, whispering, 300 years, alone." Elias nodded slightly, his expression calm but filled with quiet grief. "Loneliness is easier when you believe it has a purpose." Vexa felt her breath break as she whispered, "And now, does it?" Elias looked at her with eyes that held hope and sadness in equal measure, and he said softly, "It does now." In that moment her throat closed, her heart crumbled, and she realized something terrifying. She didn't want him to be alone anymore. She didn't want to walk away. She didn't want this connection to disappear. And the fear that rose inside her wasn't fear of humans. It was fear of losing the first person who had ever truly seen her. And as the fire crackled softly between them, she understood with trembling clarity that this moment wasn't the end of her mission. It was the beginning of something she didn't know how to name. Something that scared her. Something that healed her. Something that could change everything she had ever believed. And she wasn't sure her heart would survive it. It began in a silence that felt different from before, not empty and cold, but fragile and trembling, like the world itself was holding its breath around them. And Commander Vexa sat there staring at Elias, her heart still aching from everything he had revealed, her mind still spinning with the weight of 300 years of loneliness, sacrifice, and quiet suffering. And for the first time in her life she felt something deeper than fear, deeper than duty, deeper than pride. She felt connected, like some invisible thread had tied her soul to his without asking her permission. And that thread pulled at her chest with a force so emotional she didn't know how to speak, how to move, how to exist. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words stuck in her throat, because how could she speak when her heart felt cracked open like a wound she had hidden for decades? And she looked at him with eyes full of questions she wasn't brave enough to voice, questions about him, about herself, about what this moment meant. And Elias just watched her gently, as if he understood every emotion she couldn't say out loud, as if he could see her breaking and didn't judge her for it. But then, without warning, her wrist device flickered to life, a sharp red light cutting through the soft darkness of the clearing, and a shrill alarm pierced the quiet like a blade, making Vexa flinch, her breath jerking painfully in her chest. She stared at the screen, her eyes widening as she read the message flashing over and over. Multiple ships entering atmosphere, unidentified, armed, approaching fast. And in that instant her stomach dropped, her blood turning cold, because she knew exactly what that meant. She wasn't the only hunter sent. She wasn't the only one tracking the human. Others were coming, ruthless, hungry, driven not by curiosity or compassion but by glory, by the desire to kill the monster the galaxy feared, to drag his corpse back as a trophy, to prove themselves superior. Her heart slammed painfully against her ribs, a mix of panic and dread ripping through her, and she whispered hoarsely, "They found me. They tracked my signal. They're coming." Elias didn't react like she expected. He didn't panic. He didn't flinch. He didn't look shocked. He just breathed out slowly, calmly, like he had known this was inevitable, like he had been waiting for this moment too, and his voice came soft but steady, "I know." That answer shattered her, because it meant he wasn't surprised, he wasn't caught off guard, he wasn't unprepared. He had been aware of this possibility long before she landed, maybe long before she ever received her mission. And suddenly Vex's fear twisted into something even more painful, not fear for herself, but fear for him. She stood quickly, her legs trembling, her voice breaking as she said, "They're not like me, Elias. They won't talk. They won't listen. They'll kill you." The desperation in her voice scared her, because she had never begged for anything in her life, never cared enough to plead. But now her heart felt like it was tearing open, because the thought of losing him, this calm, gentle, wounded soul, felt unbearable, like a knife carving through her chest. Elias rose to his feet slowly, the firelight painting warm shadows across his face, and there was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet resolve, a stillness that felt stronger than any weapon, and he said softly, "I didn't cook dinner for one." The meaning hit her like a shockwave. He knew this moment was coming. He prepared for it. He expected it. And instead of running, instead of hiding, instead of fighting out of rage, he chose to welcome her, feed her, comfort her, because he wasn't afraid of death. He wasn't afraid of them. He wasn't afraid of anything. That calm terrified her more than any battlefield she had ever walked. Her voice cracked into a whisper, "Please, run. Hide. Do something." But Elias shook his head gently, his eyes soft and heartbreakingly steady. "Running is what broke us. Hiding is what silenced us. I will not disappear again." His words tore through her like a blade of truth, and she took a shaky step toward him, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion she couldn't contain. "You don't have to face them alone." And for a moment she thought he would refuse her, thought he would send her away, thought he would choose solitude again. But instead he looked at her with a gaze so deep it felt like it reached into her soul, and he said quietly, "You're not alone anymore either." That sentence shattered her completely. She felt her breath collapse, her knees weaken, her eyes fill with hot tears she couldn't stop, because in 3 simple words Elias had given her something she had never been offered in her entire life. Not orders, not expectations, not duty, but belonging. The alarm on her wrist beeped again, louder this time, the screen showing multiple life signals closing in fast, hostile, armed, surrounding the clearing like a tightening noose, and Vex's panic surged through her like fire, her voice rising in a desperate whisper, "They'll destroy everything. They'll take you. They'll—" Elias gently touched her wrist, not grabbing, not restraining, just resting his hand over the trembling device. And the moment his skin brushed hers, a shock of warmth spread through her arm, through her chest, through her entire body, grounding her in a way she had never felt, silencing the storm inside her heart, and he whispered, "They won't take anything from me." His voice wasn't arrogant, wasn't mocking, wasn't cruel. It was calm, heartbreakingly calm, like a man who had already made peace with whatever came next, like someone who knew his strength didn't need to be loud to be real. Vex's breath trembled as she looked into his eyes and saw something terrifying. The calm of a warrior who didn't fight for glory or fear, but for purpose, for meaning, for peace. Suddenly branches snapped in the distance, heavy footsteps surrounding them, red targeting lasers cutting through the darkness, voices shouting commands, armor clanking, weapons powering up, and Vex's heart exploded with panic, her voice breaking into a choked sob as she whispered, "Elias, please." Not as a soldier, not as a hunter, but as a woman who didn't want to lose the first person who ever made her feel human. Elias stepped forward, placing himself between her and the approaching threat, his posture relaxed, his shoulders loose, his heartbeat steady, and he whispered without turning around, "Stay behind me." In that moment Vexa realized something she had never understood until now. Humans were never feared because they were violent. They were feared because they could stand calm in the face of chaos, because they could protect without rage, because they could choose mercy when the world offered them only pain. And the most emotional truth slammed into her chest all at once. She wasn't afraid of what Elias was about to do. She was afraid of how deeply she needed him to survive. And as the enemy forces broke through the trees, weapons raised, voices roaring, the world held its breath. Because the galaxy was about to remember what a human truly was. And Vexa, trembling behind him, understood with a heart-crushing certainty that nothing would ever be the same again that began in a single heartbeat. The kind that feels too loud, too painful, too fragile. Because the moment the armed hunters burst through the trees, the entire clearing seemed to shatter into fear and chaos, red targeting lights sweeping across the dark like hungry eyes, metal boots pounding against the earth, voices snarling orders. Weapons humming with deadly energy, and Commander Vexa felt her entire body go cold, her lungs locking as if the air itself had turned solid, because she knew these soldiers, knew their ruthlessness, their hunger for glory, their desperation to kill the monster the galaxy feared, and she knew they would not stop, would not listen, would not hesitate, and the terror that surged through her chest wasn't for herself, it was for Elias. She reached forward as if to grab him, her voice breaking into a whisper of raw panic, "Elias, please." But her words died in her throat because he stepped forward, calm, steady, unshaken, his back straight, his breathing slow, as if he were walking into a quiet evening instead of a battlefield. And that calm was more terrifying than anything she had ever seen in her life. The first hunter shouted, "Target acquired. Fire on sight." And dozens of weapons locked onto Elias, red beams converging on his chest like a single lethal heartbeat. And Vexa's scream clawed up her throat but never made it out, her hand trembling helplessly in the air. Because she knew what those weapons could do, she knew they could erase a living body in seconds, and her heart fractured because she couldn't lose him. Not now, not after everything he had shown her, everything he had been, everything he had awakened inside her. Her knees buckled, tears burning her eyes, and she whispered a soundless prayer she didn't even believe in, begging the universe not to take him, begging fate not to rip him away. But Elias didn't flinch. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't even have one. He simply lifted his head, eyes steady and heartbreakingly calm. And for a moment the world seemed to go quiet around him, like even chaos paused to listen. The lead hunter barked the final command, "Fire," and explosions of light ripped through the clearing. But in the same breath something impossible happened. Elias moved, not fast in the frantic, panicked way Vexa expected, but with a smoothness so controlled it felt unreal, like he was stepping through time instead of space, his body weaving between beams of deadly energy with quiet precision, every motion effortless and fluid, as though he had already memorized every shot before it was fired. Vexa's breath caught violently in her chest because she couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. No armor, no shield, no rage, no roar, just silence and movement, like a ghost dancing through death itself, and in seconds he was among them, his hands moving with terrifying gentleness, disarming weapons, flipping safeties, removing power cores, all without striking a single blow, without spilling a drop of blood, without hurting anyone. Soldiers fell to the ground, not dead, not broken, just stunned, their weapons useless, their bodies frozen in shock, because Elias hadn't come to kill them. He had come to stop them without destroying them. And that mercy, that unbearable mercy, was what made Vexa's heart collapse. A single human, surrounded by trained killers, choosing restraint when he could have chosen destruction. Choosing calm when everyone else chose violence. Choosing compassion when the galaxy expected carnage. Tears spilled down her cheeks uncontrollably, her lips trembling as she whispered, how are you doing this?" Not expecting an answer, not sure her voice could be heard over the pounding of her own heart. The last hunter lunged at Elias with a desperate scream, and Elias caught the strike gently, almost tenderly, placing one hand on the soldier's chest, guiding him to the ground like he was laying a child to sleep. No pain, no brutality, just quiet finality, and then it was over. The clearing fell silent again. The weapons lay scattered like broken fears, the soldiers breathing but powerless, and Elias stood alone in the center, barely winded, barely changed, as if everything he just did was as natural as breathing. Vexa staggered forward, her body trembling, her voice breaking open like a wound. "Elias, you could have killed them." He turned toward her slowly, his eyes soft and unbearably human, and said in a voice that felt like truth wrapped in sorrow, "If we kill every threat, eventually we become the threat." Her knees gave out, and she sank to the ground, her hands pressed against her face as sobs shook her body, because she finally understood the truth the galaxy had buried. The reason humans were feared wasn't their power to destroy, but their power to choose not to. The strength to hold back. The strength to protect without cruelty. The strength to be gentle when the world demanded violence. And that strength was more terrifying, more awe-inspiring, more godlike than any weapon ever built. Elias stepped closer, his footsteps soft, and for a moment Vexa feared he would disappear into the shadows, leave her like everyone else had. But instead he knelt beside her, not touching her, just close enough that she could feel his warmth, his presence, his heartbeat steady and real, and he said softly, "Now you know why they feared us." Vexa lifted her tear-streaked face, her voice trembling, "And why they lied." Elias looked at the fallen soldiers, the broken weapons, the silent forest, and whispered, "Fear turns truth into monsters." A silence settled between them, deep, aching, fragile, and Vexa felt her heart shift, something old and hardened breaking apart to make room for something new, something terrifying, something tender. She reached out with a shaking hand, not to grab him, not to hold him prisoner, but to make sure he was real, and whispered, "What happens now?" Elias stood slowly, his gaze rising to the dark horizon where the sky pulsed with the glow of distant ships. More hunters, more armies, more eyes from a galaxy that would soon know the truth. And in a voice soft but filled with unshakable resolve, he answered, "Now the galaxy learns what humanity truly is." And in that moment, Vexa understood the final, devastating truth. This wasn't the end of their story, it was only the beginning.